So, one of the Russian objectives was to basically create a land bridge to Crimea. In order to accomplish that, Mariupol was basically sieged, and at this point, has just fallen. With a caveat. The city has been, like I said, under attack for a long time. And the wild part about it is the last defense, let's say the last stand, was taking place at this steel plant called Azovstal steel plant. That plant has underground tunnels that are basically fortified against bombardment. So you basically get the Azov battalions, the most fanatic of the fanatics, basically neo-Nazis, and they are basically making a last stand in Mariupol, which ends up making a last stand at the steel plant. Now, the Russians are saying there are about 2,500 people left. Some of those people are mercenaries from other countries, Poland, US, etc., etc. But supposedly, they're not there on official capacity. I have pointed out for more than a week now that the situation in that plant was dire, that they were in a desperate, desperate situation, barely clinging to life, and yet Zelensky wouldn't let them surrender. And what makes it weirder still, they're surrounded, they're lacking food, they're lacking ammunition, and this is not me saying it, this is them saying it. Back on April 11th, but keep in mind, they're in a military wartime situation where they are basically losing, completely surrounded, running out of food, ammunition, provisions. Most of them are either wounded or dead. And again, no way out. There's no God that is coming to save them in the situation. They're basically going to be annihilated if they stay there. Zelensky would not allow them to surrender. Russia has opened multiple corridors, has allowed them to basically come out. They refuse to do so. And now they're saying hostages or civilians. We'll talk about that in a moment. But April 11th, writing on Facebook, the 36th Brigade said its 47-day defense of Mariupol was coming to a tragic conclusion. Quote, "We're bombed from airplanes and shot by artillery and tanks. We have been doing everything possible and impossible, but any resource that has the potential to run out," it said. Quote, "The enemy gradually pushed us back. They surrounded us with fire and are now trying to destroy us," the Marines posted. The mounted and wounded amounted to nearly half of the brigade, with whose limbs are not torn off, continuing to fight. He's describing the situation of the people around him. Let's keep going. Right here. "For more than a month, we fought without resupplying our ammunition, without food, without water," the Marines posted, adding that they are forced to drink water from puddles. The message ends. "It's death for some of us, captivity for the rest. Do not talk badly about the Marines. We are faithful forever." Again, these are the most fanatic Nazis that are there. And for all of these, oh my God, Russia's going to take Kiev. Russians are having a hard time. Ukrainians making a stand. Mariupol is falling. Regardless of what they're giving you, this narrative in the West, that city with that group of that force that they had there, this is a massive loss for Ukraine. And I know the major battle is taking place at this point in the East, but still, this was one of the main objectives that Russia wanted to accomplish. This is a win. That's what that looks like. Now, if that was April 11th, what's today? April 21st. 10 days ago. What does the situation look like today? Now, Russia gave the heads up that they basically have taken all of the city, with the exception of the steel plant. Now, the catch becomes, what is the difficulty with taking the steel plant? The difficulty with taking the steel plant has to do with the thing is fortified structure, for one, that goes all the way back to the Soviet times. And apparently, underground, there's basically a city that is also well fortified in order to deal with bombardment. Meaning, in order to get them out, that 2,500 or give or take how many ever is left in there, they would have to send troops down in the catacombs to do it. And so the thought becomes, okay, well, wait a minute. How many people are we going to lose if we're going to try to storm or assault that steel plant? Can we do it? Yes. How many people are we going to lose to do it? And is that acceptable? And is there a better way to do it? There is a better way to do it. And in this case, Putin basically said, blockade the building. Box it up. Get it to the point where nothing can get in, nothing can get out. And at the point where those men decide to throw their weapons down, they can come out. If that was April 11th, this is the situation that came out yesterday. Still there. Even in those situations, they were still there. Again, these are fanatics. Quote, the enemy is outnumbering us 10-1, Sherry Volna from the 36th Separate Marine Brigade said as he appealed for extraction from the last stronghold in Mariupol in a Facebook post on Wednesday. Hundreds of civilians are believed to be sheltering in the basement. All right, let's talk about that. No, I don't buy that. Now, if there are, this is more egregious. Because understand, Russia has given them multiple opportunities to leave, and they refuse to do so. And so if indeed you're basically forcing civilians to stay underground with you, that is that much more disgusting and egregious. I mean, for God's sake, it's one thing if you want to be fanatic, it's another thing if you're going to keep those people. But this adds more credence to this notion of civilian shields, that they've been shooting people if those people were trying to leave their habitats. This was something that I mentioned a long time ago. This was something that I think is just kind of foreseeable in things people do in war, especially when those people are at a disadvantage or they're losing that war. They need propagandistic value from the people that are basically dying. And if you could put a missile launcher near somebody's house or put some kind of artillery near somebody's house and then shoot the people when they're basically trying to leave. These are some of the reports that are coming out. So if they are basically now saying that they have civilians with them in those catacombs, and that when Russia offered them multiple opportunities to walk out, throw their weapons down, and surrender, and they refused to do so, but it would also mean that now they're saying they also refuse to let those civilians come out. Look, at this point, we have no idea. This is like the first indication of civilians that came out of nowhere. And fact of the matter is, if you were in a losing military situation that was radically desperate, you know your life is pretty much at its end if you don't get that situation relieved. What would you say in order to try to get out that situation, or at the very least hold back who's coming to get you just that much more, or give them that much more of a thought? Of course you'll say it. You'll say whatever you have to say in that situation. The information warfare has been going both ways. But I live in the West. And from the standpoint of the West, it's been hysterical. It has been utterly hysterical. But let's keep going. I haven't seen any evidence of civilians. I just said that. And I suspect none exists. But who knows? At the point where this place opens, you'll be able to see what's in. Its defense ministry said Ukrainian forces are still holed up inside Azovstal steel plant. We're facing a, quote, catastrophic situation, unquote. Quote, we appeal and plead for all the world leaders to help us, Volna said in the video. We ask them to use the procedure of extraction and take us to a territory of a third-party state. Volna said the Russians had the advantage in air, artillery, their forces in land, equipment, and in tanks. We're only defending one object, the Azovstal plant, where in addition to military personnel, there are also civilians who have fallen victim to the war. He added again, if there are civilians that have fallen victim to the war, when Russia gave you the opportunity to leave, why did you not let those people leave? There's another interesting part to this. The idea that he's asking a third party to intervene into the war, to take them to a third country. Why do you need to go back to a third country? Why wouldn't you want to just go back to Kiev? Why wouldn't you want to go back to Ukraine? Isn't that weird? Now, there were reports that came out that basically said that the Kiev government was not allowing the people who were in that steel plant to surrender, despite the situation that they were presented with. They had zero chance of escape, no food, no water. Half of the people were basically either dead or injured. Many of the people were missing limbs, apparently, and they were drinking water from a puddle, and that was 10 days ago. So the situation is going to be that much more dire at this point. And so this idea that you're not going to let these people surrender. All right. The point that I'm making here is, if the Russians are right, and the Russians basically said that their communications, and in those communications, Kiev refused to let the people who were in that steel plant surrender. All right. So the order comes out saying the Donetsk People's Republic and the Russian military has liberated Mariupol. Okay. You get to the point where the defense minister, Shoigu, makes the point about what would need to take place right here. Shoigu pointed out that Kiev regime has significantly fortified Mariupol, where 8,100 troops, militants from nationalist battalions, and foreign mercenaries were stationed at the time when the city was surrounded. Over 4,000 Ukrainian fighters were killed during military activities, and another almost 1,500 surrendered to Russia. Shoigu did not reveal the number of Russians that basically were injured or killed. This is the decision being made on whether or not to storm the city. Russian troops would need about 3 to 4 days to take control of Azovstal, where 2,000 people remain at the moment. Putin, however, called off the potential offensive, saying it would be unreasonable. Quote, in this case, we need to think about it. I mean, we always need to think about it. But particularly in this case, we need to think about preserving the life and health of our soldiers and officers. There's no reason to penetrate through the subterranean pathways and beneath the industrial facilities. Putin explained. He says Azovstal should be blocked so that even a fly can't get out and everyone be offered to lay down their arms. Quote, Russia guarantees their lives and appropriate treatment under the relevant international laws. All those wounded will be provided the quality medical care, Putin emphasized. And there's a logic to it, right? Do we really want to send our troops down in order to potentially get killed, injured, hurt, etc., in a situation where, A, they can't get out, they can't go anywhere, they're out of provisions, and basically one of two things is going to happen. They're going to lay down their arms and come out, or they're going to basically die a grisly death in the dark in the catacombs, one or the other. And yes, that is grim, to put it mildly. And no, I don't think anybody wants to basically die in the dark underground, lacking food, water, shelter, medicine, etc., etc. And we'll see what happens. If indeed the people did want to surrender, at some point they're going to have to make a choice on whether they want to allow themselves to be annihilated for the Ukrainian state, even though it serves no literal purpose outside of some kind of propaganda value where you can basically say, look at the massacre that took place at Azovstal. But is that really what you want to lose your life for? It's not even for any good particular purpose. It's allowing good men, or men at the very least, to die in a hellish situation purely for propagandistic value in a war they're still going to lose anyway. So Azovstal is going to be blockaded. At this point, the conflict continues. That conflict is basically taking place in the east. And I think in my next video, I want to go into what is taking place in the west, meaning from the standpoint of what we're dealing with. Inflation, you have this kind of darkening economic picture, you have famines in some part of the world as a result of this stuff. I was looking at some of the European news. Look at Germany. This is like astonishing. Right here. In fact, we'll talk about it now. German annual producer price inflation topped 30% in March. The country's Federal Statistics Office said on Wednesday that is the highest level since the agency began collecting data 73 years ago. The culprit, energy prices, which rose nearly 84% from the same month last year. Think about that. 84%, whatever you were paying for energy costs. Think back in the United States, I believe this was during Carter, where there was the oil embargo by Saudi Arabia against the U.S. And if you think back to those old pictures, you have people standing by their cars. Car can't move. You have a recession that basically take place. Why? Because if your energy costs go extremely high and you have a profit margin that you need to make, what happens when you have to pay 84% more for energy? What does that do to the profit margin? And what does it do to your capability of expanding, of getting revenue, and all of that stuff? Meaning it shapes your economy in real world terms. And so if the cost of everything goes up, because it's not just specific to energy, it's also you need to get a product from point A to point B, and whatever your product costs on some level, that price is also built into it. So that stuff becomes on some level exponential in regards to the way that those prices increase. Now, did it have to happen? No, it did not have to happen. None of this had to happen. At any point along the way, negotiations could have taken place. The West said, you have no real security concerns, which is ridiculous. ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. And then you get people like Borrell basically saying, hey, we should have never offered Ukraine NATO membership. No duh. No duh. And he's saying that after all of these people have basically lost their lives. And from the standpoint of the West, no, they may not necessarily be in war zones, but at the very least, they're paying for it. I mean, the amount of money that people are going to have to pay in this country. Germany is the beating heart of Europe. That's the way it's always talked about, the beating heart of Europe, the industrial center of Europe. What happens when Germany has the 30% inflation with energy costs going through the roof, and you get Macron having a debate with Le Pen, and Macron, I'm going to have to show that clip. I got to show that. Because it's this weird situation where Le Pen says something completely rational. France first. No more, no less. I accept the sanctions, but we should not touch oil and gas. That's what she said. And considering Germany said themselves that if they cut off Russian gas, that the German economy would basically collapse. German industry would collapse. What is wrong with that statement? Macron comes in and basically is telling her, you don't have the capability to make the choices that are in the best interest of France. And arguing that she is in the pocket of Vladimir Putin. Now, between these two people, what makes more sense? Who has France's best interest? The people who basically are lumping in with a provocation that never had to happen in the first place, and is now creating a context where the people of Europe and the people in the United States is going to have to pay through the nose. And not just pay through the nose. The dollar hegemony in and of itself is being put into question. Why do you believe that other countries is going to see the United States steal money from another country and not think, oh, wow, that could happen to us? Or for that matter, see the way the dollar is being weaponized. I mean, even the sanctions and the way the sanctions are used almost as a help or economic assist under this guise of foreign policy. All of those things on some level is a weaponization of dollar and finance in order to hurt other countries that are out of alignment with U.S. interests. If countries see the U.S. can do that to one country, what would they think about themselves? Especially if something comes up where they run afoul of the United States. Take, for example, Kenya. I mean, they have... No, I'm sorry, not Kenya, Ethiopia. You get the situation where the U.S. government, Ethiopia gets attacked by the TPLF, a organization that was in power for 30-something years in this kind of dictatorship. And despite the fact that the government is being attacked, the U.S. comes out and basically says somehow the Ethiopian government is at fault. And on top of the Ethiopian government at fault, goes out and attacking, talking about sanctions on the Ethiopian government. The Ethiopian government was literally attacked. It's astonishing. And attacked by the authoritarian government that was there prior. Now, part of the reason that Glenn Youngkin lost that race in Virginia has everything to do with the Biden administration and the things that they were basically saying, because the Ethiopians came out in air trains and they punished the Democratic Party for that. My point, because I've strayed very far away from it, they are taking various actions that are adversely affecting the local populations in these countries. And we are paying for that stuff. And the countries around the world know full well the context of what is taking place, regardless of the propaganda that is being put out to the people in those various constituencies. If Le Pen is saying we should not take this action because this action is going to injure France, and you guys have provoked this conflict, which again, all of them know, whether they would say it or not, all of them know the steps that have gotten us up to this point. All of them are entirely and completely aware. And so when she's saying that, what is more in the interest of France? Going along with these NATO nations that they basically jab themselves in the genitals on behalf of the United States for this kind of geopolitical conquest stuff? Or, hey, it is not in France's best interest to basically get rid of or sanction oil and gas. Between those two things, Macron, even though he wants to try to peg her as this Putin puppet type thing, the reality of it is Macron is less French and more European. And there's a massive difference in those things. Meaning, from the standpoint of Macron in this kind of European project that he wants to be a part of and he wants to lead, This is not a rah-rah for Le Pen, but clearly, in the context of the way these two people are talking about the events on the ground and how those things affects France, she is clearly on a page, in the sense that France is going to matter more than this geopolitical project that you guys are involved in. Again, that's not rah-rah for Le Pen. It's just the reality of events. But look, I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I am going to say subscribe.